Today is August 24th, 2023. My name is Melissa Ackerman, and I will be interviewing Stuart Prescott as part of the JCC Past Presidents Project. Good morning, Stuart. How are you?
Great. Good morning.
What was the JCC's official name during your tenure?
We were the Jewish Community Center of Dallas.
No person's name attached to it? It was just
No person's name from before or after.
Okay. When did you serve?
I was president of the board 2002 to 04.
How many years were you on the board before you rose up to president? Do you remember?
Well, let's see. Yeah, because Matt was in the two. Well, I guess he was about in the just past the two. So that would be 86 was when I started my first volunteer job at the J.
Which was what?
Marcia Mock, who ran the preschool, asked me to lead the Seder for the two-year-olds. And she said, "You have 7 minutes."
We should all wish for a Seder that's about 7 minutes. No, so that was
my first, and then I guess I was on the school board, and then I guess I got on the board probably 2 years later, if I had to guess.
Okay. And what was your title during your tenure? Were you president? Were you chairman? Were you?
Oh, we were presidents back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And who were the various leaders during your tenure?
Well, you mentioned Toby Gerber earlier. He was really at the top of the list. Martin Goldman was really my mentor, who really brought me into the J as a volunteer. Yannette Hogue, Ron Foxman, Kenny Goldberg, of course. Mike Hirsch preceded me as president, and then Jeff Seymour followed, and lots of other good friends who weren't presidents but were great board members.
What was the relationship between the J and the Federation at that time, during your tenure?
Tenuous at best.
Anything in particular that caused that?
Well, the J was struggling financially, and the debate was on whether to build our way out of our issues or whether to take a very conservative approach, peel back, reduce services, potentially even close. We closed the Glencliff JCC during my tenure, which was all part of trying to recover financially.
What was Glencliff?
So we had a second site, the Jewish Community Center, we called it the Glencliff campus, and it was in Plano, and we made an attempt to try to expand our services out to, the outer regions, and just didn't quite get the traction that we had hoped. Location could have been an issue, and we decided financially that it was a draining, one of the drains on the center, and we just needed to close it.
Who was the executive director at that time of the J?
Jay Jacobs.
Okay.
And I will just add that, believe it or not, one of the most exciting JCC meetings I've ever been to, and not in a good way, was when we called the board together to discuss closing a JCC. It was monumental. And
Closing the Glencliff campus?
Was absolutely shocking, the idea of closing a JCC. Although many had closed around the country, we just couldn't believe we were having the conversation. I called every past president and said, "We're going to have this discussion, and I would appreciate it if you would be there." And we had 100% past president attendance. We had to move the board meeting to the senior assembly room. And while it was a terrible meeting to have to discuss that topic, it was just amazing that everybody from the board and all the past presidents knew how important it was, and they showed up.
Had other JCCs around the country struggled with opening satellite locations, or was it just kind of the nature of what was going on in Dallas at the time?
It was partially, I mean, surely a function of what was happening here at our JCC, but also the JCC movement around the country was having issues. I know in Los Angeles at one point they had 7 JCCs. It's been a long time, but maybe they were down to 3. They just said close them, and maybe they had taken an entire JCC and turned it into a senior lunch facility. Maybe they didn't close entirely, but virtually. And that was Chicago, same way, and it was kind of going around.
Who were some of the key staff that you worked with when you were on the board and as president here?
Well, Laura Seymour, and Karen Stern was the executive director, I think we called him at the time, and then followed by Jay Jacobs. Marsha Mock, I mentioned earlier, ran the preschool. I think those were the key players. Yeah.
And how did the Jewish community interact with the secular Dallas community?
Well, we really didn't until about somewhere around 2002. In fact, I remember going to a JCC biennial. It was in Boston, and I was sitting in kind of a circle with a number of other cities, Detroit, Boston, Louisville, Miami, whatever the cities were, and we talked about what percentage of your membership wasn't Jewish. And, we would go 30%, 25%, 40%, 27%, I mean, substantial numbers until they got around to us. And I said 2%, because we just did not have any Gentile members of the J. We didn't market to them, and we had been thriving and frankly didn't need the revenue. But when times got tough, that was when we began to interact with a non-Jewish community, and we made a concerted effort to market to the neighborhood, and we got a lot of non-Jewish membership, which of course helped us and still provides a lot of revenue for us.
Okay. What significant local or national or international events had any effect on your term or your era? Anything going on that you need to mention?
I would say Operation Exodus.
Tell me about that.
Okay, so Operation Exodus took place in the early 90s, and it was a successful attempt to rescue the Jews out of the former Soviet Union when Gorbachev opened the doors to let the Jews get out. And of course, a lot of them made Aliyah, and then a lot of the Russian Jews made it to major cities, maybe even some not so major cities, but especially in the Sun Belt, Dallas and Phoenix and Atlanta, I remember particularly, got a lot of new residents of the Russian who came here. And and I presume it was the same in the other cities. I thought Dallas did a fantastic job of welcoming them and teaching them and guiding them and providing services to them so that they could come into the Jewish community and be part of the Jewish community. And that included serious scholarships at the day schools and free membership or seriously discounted membership here at the J. Unfortunately, they weren't used to the way we do things here in this country. They had a real struggle trying to adapt, and their practices and habits, were not like ours. And so a lot of our members weren't necessarily comfortable, and so they found other places to work out and do their activities. And it was pretty impactful in the preschool too. The numbers dropped precipitously along with the membership because I'll call them stakeholder families, they wanted their kid to go home after preschool and play with, their classmates, and unfortunately, those families weren't really in a position to do that. You often had two working parents, and some of the kids were even probably latchkey, if I had to guess, and so a lot of the parents took off to places that, had a different arrangement, and most of them were secular schools.
Mhm.
So that you can imagine the financial impact on membership and the tuition revenue out of the preschool. So that was a huge international issue that dramatically impacted the JCC.
Mhm.
And so while Operation Exodus took place in the early 90s, as they had kids or as their kids got older and got to preschool, probably before I was president, maybe in Mike Hirsch's term or at the end of Kenny's term, those numbers began to fall, and by 2002 they had fallen.
Mhm. So who were the prominent supporters of the J to help build things back up?
You mean
Financially, or try to support the center
at
in
that time
challenging
or,
times?
or
Mhm.
along the way?
Either.
Well, I'm not sure that back in the day, before I was president, I don't know that we had, a serious benefactor family like one would say the Aaron family has been magnificent for the J. The load was spread, I think, among lots and lots of families in the community. And then, as we got, further along, closer to my term, certainly, you'd have to put the Aarons in that list, and then anybody that supported the capital campaign for the 21st century, and there were lots of those families that were huge supporters of the JCC.
Were you and your family members of the J when you were growing up?
No, not really. I did sneak in a lot, but I was here, but I don't recall my family was really ever a member.
So how did you come along and get so involved that you ended up being president?
Well, I think it's all attributable to being a Camp High counselor after my senior year before I went off to college. And I did that for a summer. And then, and as a matter of fact, when Myra and I came back from school and got married and wanted to join the J, we were scholarship members here. And Joni Weinstein was our membership director. And we got a scholarship our first year. And I remember saying to Joni, thank you for doing this. I'm going to find a way to pay the JCC back. Then the next year, I offered to pay twice what I paid the first year, and we were declined. And I was mad. And I said, I'm never going to set foot into the JCC ever again. And then fast forward 6-7 years, when Matthew was born, and Myra came home and said, time to put Matthew in preschool, and I've been to Temple, and I've been to the J, and I've been to the North Haven Co-op, and wherever else. And I'm telling you, the J has the best security, and that's where we need to put him in preschool. So I sucked it up and did it. And the next thing I know, I was doing the Seder for the twos.
That's great. What changes have you experienced in the Jewish community? How do you see it?
Well, I think our JCC is magnificent. I think the dynamic, and I can't say specifically or describe it, but I think the dynamic among the other agencies and with the Federation is significantly different. And I've seen, a lot more acceptance. I do think everybody seems to really play together well. Back in, before there was a lot of conflict, and whether it was the Reform and the Orthodox, or whether it was, everybody fighting for the same dollars, I see a lot of collaboration, and everybody seems to get along really well, and you see lots of events and programs that are sponsored by, disparate organizations.
And how do you think the J itself has changed over the years?
Oh my gosh. Obviously physically, we've got a beautiful fitness center and a great campus, but I think the idea that, first of all, we seem to be having surpluses, which is a heck of a lot better than deficits, and we are, the programming is amazing. I just watch my emails and I see all of the stuff that's happening, all the things you can learn and do that we didn't used to have. And I think it's very contemporary and very modern, and I see that one of the struggles we had was appealing to young families, and it looks like we're doing that now, especially with the opening of the new pool. It's just incredible.
Do you think Dallas was a cohesive community or divisive during your term in office?
I never saw the community as divisive. I think it's just a matter of being good and then being better. So I didn't see, well, I think there was an appropriate amount of conflict and competition back then, and I just think we've all learned to live together even better since then.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you're most proud?
During my term?
During your term and during your involvement, your...
Becoming, Jane Soleimani and I were co-chairs of the Board of Education when we got our first NAEYC accreditation, which is, a pretty big deal evidently in the preschool business, and most of our great ones here in town are accredited. I've always felt really good about that. Of course, we screwed up camp registration. It was sort of the counterbalance. I think the recovery from our financial issues, and I believe part of it was attributable to the rebranding of the J. I think part of that tenuous relationship with the Federation was fighting to get funds from the capital campaign for the 21st century that we used to build our fitness center, and the education wing and all the other things that the JCC got to do out of that capital campaign. And that was a struggle because we had to convince the Federation that we were worthy and that investing that money in the JCC was going to pay off for us in the long run. I think the evidence is there that it has. But if you ask what am I proud of, that would be one of the three things that I really feel great about. And then the other was fighting through the resistance to host our first ever Maccabi Games. So we hosted the Maccabi Games.
What are the Maccabi Games?
The Maccabi Games it's an international youth event. It usually takes place over a number of days. In the United States, usually 2 or 3 cities have historically hosted the games. Hundreds of kids, small ones might be 500-600 kids, and big ones might be 1,500 kids. As you can imagine, this is Dallas, Texas, so we did the big one. But we historically had felt that and it's a competition for all kinds of sports activities, team activities, including the arts and crafts and drama and things that were great for the kids that weren't necessarily participating in sports. It's just was a great coming together of the kids, but more importantly, and for Dallas, it was a coming together of the community. So a lot of people say, well, you can't make any money being in the dark. No, being in the Maccabi business. In fact, there was a lot of resistance to it. And it was, again, the question of, do we raise the money and invest the money in the JCC if we're failing financially? And it was a battle, but we successfully made the case that this was going to really make a contribution to the recovery, financial recovery of the JCC. Our board was fully on board with it. The games we got, it takes 2 to 3 years to ramp up, so we sort of decided to do it in maybe it was 02, perhaps early 03, and we had the games in 05, coinciding with the opening of our fitness center. So with all of the community coming to the JCC campus, doing home hospitality and all the events, we really got a chance to show our new JCC to all the members of the community, many of whom hadn't set foot in the JCC in decades, and it was really, I think, good for us.
Did it end up being profitable?
Yes, we did. We surplused, and while the money, certainly we needed the money, it was helpful. I think that was probably less impactful than the people that said, you know what, I now know about the JCC. I think I'll join the JCC, and membership began to build back.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a specific role in those games?
Well, I was president in working with our board to vote to do it, and in convincing the Federation and the rest of the community that this was an important thing for the JCC to do. I was very involved in raising the money. I appointed the chairs, Yannette Hogue and Kenny Goldberg. I did co-chair the opening ceremonies at the Mesquite Rodeo, and that was a blast. Yeah, it was great.
Have any of your family members become involved in the J over the years?
I have a cousin who said, who was always said many years ago, she would say, her dad was president of the J, and she would say, we had the JCC for dinner every night. And that was kind of what it was in my house, too. We kind of had the JCC for dinner every night. And whenever I was up here, as you can imagine, it would be a lot, but for all the events and, my family came along. My kids came up through preschool and camp, both of them here, and then they learned to volunteer here. Myra has been a great volunteer here, and it was a family effort. And now Matt Prescott is my son, and he's a vice president on the board of directors.
You must be very proud of that.
I am, definitely.
Are there any other stories or things you'd like to talk about before we wrap up?
I think one of the greatest things about this place is the relationships. And I know this is true probably of every organization that has board members and leaders, that they develop relationships from being together and working together for so many years. And I just have a feeling that the JCC is exceptional about that. All of the past chairs or presidents, we have relationships, we see each other, we do an annual past presidents luncheon. The J is great about keeping us all apprised of what's happening around here. And we're together, we've made lasting friendships, and they're really warm. And if anybody ever asks me, you know, what do you get out of this? That's what I got out of it. And my family's volunteerism, I think, is great, but all those relationships and friendships that have lasted so long, you know, that's been the bonus for me.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you.